This is a video on two-point perspective drawing, and I'm going to use Photoshop to basically create some imaginary buildings. The reason that I'm not actually going to use pencil and paper and a ruler is because I just simply don't have the video capability to record myself drawing. So I'm going to use Photoshop in lieu of actual drawing, but every single thing that I do in Photoshop applies to what you can do with a pencil and paper and a ruler. This might also be kind of maybe an intro to Photoshop if you've never used Photoshop before. So here we go. So the very first thing that you need to do is to establish the horizon line. And I'm going to first create two vanishing points. And I created the first vanishing point in red, and then I'm going to use the line tool to create the horizon line. Now, in Photoshop, if you hold Shift down and use the line tool, it makes a perfectly straight line. So I'm using that as a tool to figure out where the second vanishing point would be directly across the picture plane here. So now I have the horizon line, the two vanishing points, so I'm going to get rid of the horizon line because all that you need visible are just the two vanishing points for the two-point perspective, the two vanishing points. So to start off with, to make a building, I'm going to make a vertical line that would represent one corner of a building. And notice I didn't make it smack dab in the middle of the picture, and I also made it so the top of the line is below the horizon line and the top of the line is above the horizon line. So once you have that, you're able to then go and make lines that connect to the vanishing points on each side. And these lines would represent the top and the bottom of the building as they recede back in space. So basically, the closer the object is to the eye, the larger it appears. So this part of the building right here is the closest part of the building to the viewer. So now I've established two rear walls, or I guess the edges of the walls there, and now these lines that fully connect to the vanishing points, they can be deleted. So I'm having to go through in Photoshop and do some things that I wouldn't normally have to do if I was using pencil and paper. But so whenever you use a line or a shape, like a square or a circle in Photoshop, it makes that a vector layer, which can't be edited. It can't be erased. It can't be deleted. So what I had to do is I had to rasterize each of those layers to something that I can edit. So now I'm going to use the rectangular marquee tool and select those extra lines that don't need to be there, and then I'm just deleting them. So now we're left with a three-quarter view of a cube of some kind, which eventually will become a building. And now I'm going to, again, continue using the vanishing points. I'm going to establish some sort of entryway to this building. So any line that would go vertical is totally vertical at it's straight up and down. It doesn't go to any of the vanishing points, and all vertical lines are parallel with one another. Whereas the horizontal lines, they recede back into space, and they're never, ever, ever parallel with one another. So again, I'm just having to rasterize some shapes so that I can delete them. Okay, so now I have a developing facade of the building, an entryway with some sort of marquee or awning that is above it. Now I'm going to work on putting the building in space. So now it's going to be attached, it's going to be anchored to something. So now I'm creating the ground. and these first lines will create the sidewalk. And you might follow along with this. You can press pause um, to slow it down, but you know, you could do this right on your paper with a pencil and a ruler. This is not something that has to be done on a computer. Okay, so here's the other side of the sidewalk. Now you'll see that right up front I have a square that would represent you know, a section of the sidewalk, and that first section will determine the size of all of the other sections that go down the sidewalks toward the vanishing points. And this same technique can be used for receding light posts or windows or bricks or anything that's the same size, same scale, that recedes back into space. Because of course, as something goes back into space, it becomes much smaller to the eye. So right now I'm just cleaning up the sidewalk area. I'm trying to figure out what layer I'm on, and now I'm fixing the eraser. Now I'm just making the edge of the curb that comes down on the side of the sidewalks. So now I merged all of those lines together into one layer. Photoshop works with layers that you can stack on top of one another. You can see through them. It's just, that's the way that you arrange all of your elements in Photoshop. Okay, so let's say I want to divide this entryway into two equal sections. The way that you find the center of a rectangular or circular or even square area is just to connect lines between opposite corners, and then right there where those two lines intersect, that's the center of that rectangle there. And I'm going to do the very same thing with the sidewalk section. But first I'm going to go ahead and divide this area in two. I'm just going to draw a line and then I'll eventually shift it over to that intersection. Okay, so now I'm going to find the center of this first sidewalk section. Just going to connect the four corners, and then where the two lines intersect, that is the center point. So then the next thing that I need to do is connect that center point to both vanishing points. So you see the line starts at a vanishing point and then goes through that center point, and I'm going to do the same thing for the other side as well. Okay, so now this is where this gets a little tricky. I'm going to make the next sidewalk section. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start in this front corner that's closest to me, and I'm going to draw a line that goes from that corner through the midpoint of that side. So I'm going to start here in the corner, and I'm going to go through. I'm going to make that line intersect the midpoint on the far side of that first section. Now where that line hits the top edge of the sidewalk, that is where the next segment will begin. So I'll connect that point with the vanishing point on the left side. Now that's the next section. And if you were drawing, or if I was using a pencil and a ruler, there's no reason to draw that extra line. You can just line up the ruler and just make your mark directly on the sidewalk, and that'll save you from having to erase like I'm having to do now. But in Photoshop, there's no way for me to do this without making a full line. And you just keep doing this over and over and over and over, and eventually you could fill the entire sidewalk. And you'll notice that each time you do this, the section it becomes smaller, and it also the line becomes more and more horizontal and less diagonal, because it's getting closer to the horizon line. And when a line is at the horizon line, when a horizontal line is at the horizon line, it's perfectly flat. So every time I do this, the new line becomes flatter and flatter, until eventually the section that would be way up here on the horizon would be completely flat. And I would suggest when you're doing something like this, you should definitely use your hardest pencil that you have and draw very lightly, because as you just saw, you're going to have to do a lot of erasing when you're doing things like sidewalks and windows. There's lots of cleanup. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a second building that is behind the first building. So the first building will overlap the second building and obscure a lot of the building. So you start off with a vertical line that represents the corner of the building that is the closest to the viewer, and then you connect the top and the bottom to the horizon lines. Now, since I wasn't able to draw the bottom of the building with the first line, I drew an additional line where I wanted the building to end, because I wanted the building to set back off of the sidewalk slightly. And of course, if I was using pencil and paper, I wouldn't have had to have drawn that line or this line that I'm now erasing. You just line your ruler up and just draw the lines that are necessary. Okay, now I'm going to begin to put some architectural elements on this back building. I'm going to start by putting just an edge at the very top of the roof. You know, maybe some metal flashing that comes over the roof to help the top of the building to prevent the top of the building from rotting. You see that a lot on buildings like this. Okay, now I want to start making some windows, and I'll follow the very same method that I used to make the sidewalks, only this time instead of making flat sections, I'm making vertical sections. So just like with the sidewalk, you first have to develop the path that the windows will go in, and that is this rectangular area here. The windows are going to go here. And first I just have to just decide where the first window goes, and then from that I can determine the size of all of the additional windows as they recede back in space. First I have to find the midpoint of the first window, so you just connect the opposite corners, and that gives you the midpoint, and then you draw a line back to the vanishing point that goes through that midpoint. And then I start in the bottom corner and go through the side midpoint, and where it hits the top line, that is where the next vertical line will go to create the second window space, and so on and so on. And now I'm ready to make some decisions. And I've decided that this isn't going to be a continuous bank of windows. I'm going to space the windows out. So there's a window and then an equal space of bricks or block, and then another window. So now we're left with 3 windows. Now up to this point, every single thing that we've done has only been just lines that have been made on the surface of those cubes, because these buildings right now are basically cubes. So how do you show, or how do you remove areas away from the cube? How do you show that it's three-dimensional? It's not just a picture of a window. So now I'm gonna create the illusion that you can see inside of these windows, and so you can see the structure on the inside. So it's not just purely a flat plane. So here, just by removing that line right there, now that area suddenly becomes open. Maybe it's a parking structure up there. And so now I just use the vanishing point. Now I've got the spot where the wall meets the ceiling of this little part of the roof that hangs over. Maybe it's a balcony. I'm not sure what it's in depth. And now we're able to see the thickness. Okay, so now we've removed area from a cube. Now let's add more onto one of these cubes. So in the first building, I'm going to add some sort of overhang similar to the one on the building behind that we removed material to create. This time I'm going to add material to create a sort of overhang. So it's just simply connecting to the vanishing points. Now I'm just going to make this overhang a little bit thicker. And so to figure out how long this line needs to be in the front part of the overhang, I'll have to use the back line that I just made as a reference. So I connect the bottom of it through the vanishing point, and I'm just going to arbitrarily end the line here where I think it's close to where it needs to be. I may have to go back and erase, but I'm just going to... Really, I should have started out with this, making this edge first, but it's okay. So I'm going to have a little tiny bit to erase. And now you can see that the addition that I've just made is now becoming it's becoming more apparent what it's going to look like. And I just have one more line to create the edge where the overhang meets the left wall. And I don't need any vanishing points for this line because I have points where I know that they're going to meet. So now we've added something to a building. Now, of course, you could do the very opposite, and instead of creating an overhang right here, you could have removed that whole section below the overhang to create the overhang. So now let's do the very same thing with this facade, this rectangle. Let's turn it into an actual awning, an overhang over the sidewalk. Now this is a little tricky because this line, the top of the doorway, it's actually right on the horizon perfectly, and that was an accident. So it's kind of an optical illusion. And that happens every once in a while. It looks kind of funny right now, but once I finish it, it'll make sense. Okay, so now that I have the building both buildings mostly built, I mean I could continue making them more detailed, but I'm not going to. I'm going to go ahead and create a light source. So I'm going to put a sun in the picture, even though this sun is going to be larger than it would be in reality, and um, you know, I'm just doing this just to show how to create shadows, not cast shadows, but just shadows on the buildings themselves. So I'm going to make this larger than life sun, and I'm going to make it appear like it's behind this building. And the reason that I have it just behind the building is just so that you can tell that it's actually way back in space. So I'm using overlapping to give a sense of depth. So that means that the sun is radiating light toward these buildings, but parts of the buildings are going to be on the opposite side of that light, like inside of these windows and that wall here and this part of the awning. They're going to receive very little light. So I'm going to create. Well, I'm having to do some Photoshop stuff here in order to add color, but I'm just selecting all the areas that are facing the opposite direction of the sun, and then I'm going to give them a dark color. And now I'm choosing all of the surfaces that are facing, still not facing the sun, but they're probably going to get a little tiny bit of diffused light from the sun, so it'll be a lighter color than the previous color.